Well, we're here today to talk about the subject of making art. And before we do that, I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Rebecca Quintana, and I work at the Center for Academic Innovation. But in a prior life, I was actually an art teacher, teaching young children all the way from junior kindergarten, as we would say in Canada, all the way up to um, 12th grade. I'm very happy to be here to talk about the subject of what it means to take an idea that we have in our minds about what we would like to create and then move that into an artistic expression or form of some kind. So I'm very delighted to be here with my friend Ryan Henyard, who's also my colleague at the Center for Academic Innovation. And Ryan, would you take a moment to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Hello, my name is Ryan Hinyard. At work, I'm at the Center for Academic Innovation at the University of Michigan, where I serve as our faculty experience designer. But like Rebecca, in previous lives, I've done a lot of work as a graphic designer, as a photographer, as an artist in a number of different formats, and that's what made me really excited to be able to participate in this and be able to explore making art and understanding how we move from concept to an actual artistic creation.
Wonderful. Well, let's get started. Um, so, Ryan, I wonder if you could tell us just some of the first things that you think about before you get started making art. What are some of the initial considerations that you work through before you even pick up a paintbrush or pick up a camera or pick up whatever instrument you use to create your art?
Yeah, for me, when I'm getting started thinking about making art, I usually am working from some sort of inspiration and thinking about, okay, well, what inspired me to make this piece? Is there something that I saw that I really wanted to share that view with someone? Is there something that expresses an emotion that I wanted to convey? And I think about some of those really broad ideas before I start thinking about what I want to represent them. So early
Hmm.
on is usually what sparks the idea for me.
Hmm.
Something like, oh, if I saw a bird make a very, very cool loop in the air, that might
Hmm.
inspire me to try to find a way to capture and share that. Because
Yeah.
for me, art is about expressing not just myself, but also the things that I see in the world. And so it's a
Hmm.
way to kind of communicate through through creation.
Hmm. That's wonderful. And actually, we're going to start by kind of talking through what are known as the elements of design. And it's kind of like the artist's toolbox in a way, things that we all have at our disposal to create works of art. And so things like color, and you can create color, use color through a variety of means: crayons, pencil crayons, paper, different colored, paper colors here. Um, Space, so how things are positioned on a page. Shape, we all can imagine a range of shapes, but what does it mean when we combine shapes or use the same shape multiple times? Form, creating kind of a three-dimensional view through things like shading, which is value. That's what value means there. And texture, we can certainly see some texture there in the paint itself, but texture can be created through pencil, hatching, cross hatching, things like that. And then just a very basic element of design, line, like we see on our slides and our backgrounds. So all of these things can be used in pretty much infinite ways to create meaningful expression. So Ryan, I'm wondering if you can talk through maybe a couple of your favorites. What are some of your go-to elements of design when you're making a work of art?
Sure thing. Some of my favorite elements of design when I'm working on a piece of art are thinking about color in terms of what kind of emotion I want the piece of art to convey.
Hmm.
There are some times where cooler colors like blues and greens can give a sense of calmness or tranquility. Warmer colors, like we call them warmer colors in part because they often inspire that idea of warmth, things like of yellows and reds and oranges. Um,
Hmm.
for me, I think that I have a couple of photographs that I have. These are actually two halves of the same photo, showing how it looked originally on the left, where
Hmm.
you can see there's lots of amber lights, there's lots of blue lights, and um, lots of wonderful large buildings. This is a photograph I took in northern Japan, and
Wow.
I was really struck by how wonderfully built up the city was, the just how much of a futuristic feeling it was to stand at the 50th floor of a skyscraper and look out to this view all the way out into the horizon. Um, and I thought about, well, what are the elements of this photo that really speak to me? Is it, that conveying that sense of wonder and awe at technology? Is it the structure and form and the lines of the buildings as they're, regimented in a grid system, which is
Hmm.
uncommon in that country?
Hmm.
Or is it or is it different things that I wanted to evoke when I went to edit? And as a photographer, you have a couple different moments of moments where you can insert your own creativity. You can capture something as you see it, and then make a bunch of adjustments on your camera for how you capture motion. If you want it to be blurrier to show something moving, or if you want it to be more representative of exactly what you see, or if you want it to be more fantastical, you can all edit those things in post processing, and applications like Photoshop or Illustrator, but also
Hmm.
in apps like Instagram when we add filters
Oh yeah.
to our photos, or just sharing them on Facebook with Facebook or Twitter with family. We
Right.
often make a bunch of edits to make them say what we want to say. And what I
Hmm.
ended up doing was taking this piece and saying what was most important to me was the feeling that I had
Mm.
standing at the observation deck, looking out and seeing the amazing number of skyscrapers all spread out to the future, and wanting a color story that really talked to that idea. And I
Hmm.
love a lot of cybernetic art and futuristic things. And for me, that purplish glow very much transmitted that feeling that I had when I was standing there. And so, even though
Yeah.
this isn't the true color that I saw that evening, it is
Right.
something that definitely does a better job of conveying the emotion. And
Hmm.
that's what I wanted to focus on when creating this piece.
Yeah, and we can see that we don't necessarily have to represent reality exactly as we see it. We can take what we might call artistic license and use, something like color or a different element and really exaggerate it or apply it in a somewhat creative way to evoke the types of feelings that we're trying to do to make. Yes, thank you for this example.
Another example I have is a piece that I put together early in the fall last year.
Hmm.
We were normally every Thanksgiving, there's a lot of different volunteer events and opportunities to support each other, to show thanks for the things that we have. And I had been looking for opportunities to support nonprofits and a lot of other places, and was really thinking about, okay, well, what are the words that really inspired me to think about this kind of community focus, or taking care of each other in community. And I'm a native Detroiter. I grew up in the northwest side of Detroit. There's a civil rights activist by the name of Grace Lee Boggs, who I grew up admiring in
Hmm.
Detroit. And I went back to some of her words that inspired me. And I started off this piece by thinking
Wow.
of those words as the catalyst for the design, and then thinking, what are the elements and principles
Hmm.
that will communicate what I want to show to people about why this quote alone was powerful to me,
Yes.
but I wanted it to appear more powerful. I wanted to show Grace as I knew her, because I was only introduced to her as an older woman,
Hmm.
and I wanted to be able to um, show some of the show through the stained glass motif that we use for the texture,
Yeah.
and in just how much there are. Um, Sorry, let me start over.
Hmm.
I wanted to show how there are ways to think about the idea of community, and for me, stained glass is a metaphor that I did enjoy using
Hmm.
when talking about that. It's a whole lot of other pieces coming together to form a greater whole, and with the base quote of, the only way to survive is to take care of one another. it is important to recognize when we are bound up together. We are tied
Hmm.
together in a single garment,
Yes.
as MLK used to say,
Hmm.
and how that impacts, how that impacts our view of the world. There's a few other elements here in the design that are
Oh yeah.
very much interesting for Detroiters. The red lines, the lions, the stars, and the fleur de lis is in the lower left corner are all
Hmm.
elements found on the city of Detroit's um, flag,
Right.
as parts of that historical flag have been around for more than 200 years.
Hmm.
It is a nice nod to the city that raised me without having to be extremely literal. I didn't put like the Detroit skyline
Yeah.
in here, but I wanted to note that, hey, this is something that's very, very Detroit in its origin, and that was
Hmm.
my way of communicating it through this piece. Thinking about
Hmm.
how we like the composition of these elements and where they are placed all took a ton of time thinking. I
Oh
made a
yeah.
ton of different ways to frame the photo of Grace that was edited, the the quote itself, the font we choose, the
Hmm.
um, even the colors of the outline are all designed and redesigned and edited and re-edited to make sure
Yeah.
that whatever we come up with is balance, because balance is also one of the things we're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about balance in just a minute, but I just love the fact that, you know, of the elements of design are visible here, especially texture. I think that one just really shows through in the stained glass motif that you've created here, but also the fact that you've taken parts of things and combined them in new ways. So it almost reminds me of collage, where we take pieces of paper or found objects even and combine them in new ways to create art. So, and this is just a great example of that. So we can,
As a young artist, my earliest work that I ever had recognized as like a prize thing was collage work, and
yeah.
so I definitely take those elements into other things that I do. One of my favorite parts
Mhm.
about making art is that you can take things that you do in one place and apply them in another medium and find fun ways to make things
Yes.
different.
You can do the same thing again and again and again, but each time in a different way. So if we think a little bit about balance, we can talk just a bit further about what we call the principles of design. Um, and essentially what that means is we're taking those elements that we just talked about, color, line, shape, texture, and so on. And the way that we combine those together can create these types of representations. So, balance, thinking about the composition as a whole, but at the same time, emphasis. What might we really want to draw the viewer's eye towards, and how can we do that? Maybe we do it with color, maybe we do it with line or pattern. Um, Pattern is just, we can use repetition sometimes to make different patterns in different ways with line, let's say. And then unity, that's kind of around the same idea of balance, right? We want to make sure that when someone is drawn into the piece, there's enough there that it just kind of all fits together as one whole. And movement, just like we see our lines behind us here, it's kind of creating this feeling of motion and movement, and we want to move the viewer's eye around our work of art to keep them there. That's kind of the goal, right? To keep us there as long as we can, so that we can really reflect on what the work of art is saying to us. So what can you show us about how you've used principles of design in your work?
Sure thing. I know that for myself, one of the art forms that I've picked up most recently is relief printing, which
Mm-hmm.
is where you take some kind of surface. In my case, it's linoleum. In other
Yes.
cases, it can be wood or vinyl or all sorts of other
Potatoes.
materials.
You can use
Potatoes make
potatoes.
potatoes make great
Yes.
relief work.
As long as you have an adult to supervise with anything that's sharp to cut. But yes, potatoes can make a wonderful implement. Yeah.
Yes, and there's
For
so
the
many
children,
different
I'm saying.
ways.
Yes. Not
No,
you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I mean, like even veteran, carvers and printmakers all have slips, so we all have
Yeah, we
lots
all
of
have to be
safety
careful.
things that we do.
Absolutely.
but yeah, like I've been getting really into printmaking, in part because it is a very tactile process. When you're carving away from something, you're removing the different pieces, and you have to imagine it differently than if you were just drawing it directly
Yes,
onto the page. And this picture
yes.
here is a wonderful spring robin that visits the tree outside of my window pretty much every day, and he gets fluffier and happier the more I feed him, and shows up to chirp at me every morning. And in this piece, I am trying to evoke some of those principles and thinking about motion. You'll see the wind, those lines that represent the wind blowing
The
leaves
movement. Yeah,
to give you an
yeah.
idea of movement. That like, oh well, this is this bird out here in an entirely stationary environment. Okay, no, we can see the leaves
Oh.
moving a bit. We can
Hmm.
see the tree there, and there's not a ton of things in the background, and it's largely to decide how to balance it.
Yep.
And one of the things that I was interested to show you all was how some of the process of creating some of these ideas can combine multiple art forms.
Yes.
I started off with a photograph of my friendly robin outside of my window, um, and you can see that picture. And I started by, okay, well, I'm going to use that as a basis for the scene, because as a photograph, it wasn't that exciting to me. It didn't speak to me as anything particularly wonderful, but the moment and emotion of watching, watching the bird sit there while the leaves and flower petals blew around it was
Hmm.
really amazing that day, and I wanted to capture that feeling. Um, and so in this little animation, you'll see how it starts from this photograph. You see
Hmm.
me making lines and deciding which lines are most important in order to convey that this is what this
Right.
bird looked like, this is what these trees were doing. All of those are individual decisions. And you'll
Exactly.
see in the animation all of the million things that I thought about doing or trying in the composition.
Hmm.
I decided, well, what if this was a seaside picture? What if it was in the mountains? What if it was what if it was in front of a large building? What if it was in front of the Michigan Union on in Ann Arbor's
Yeah.
campus? I tested out all of those different ideas before deciding on, what I think I really
Hmm.
need to focus on is the movement and the wind and the idea of
Right.
how they work together, and being able to make those kind of um, adjustments about balance, about unity,
Yes.
are important creative pieces too. It's really easy to think that all the creativity lies in the actual physical drawing
Mm.
or taking the picture or painting, painting the canvas. But there's a lot of creativity and use of those principles in deciding what to keep and what to
Yes.
remove, how you want to edit it.
Hmm.
If the piece feels just right, if it, there's often a lot of time spent outside of that initial spark of creation, figuring out how to make it just so.
Hmm. And it's a constant dialogue with oneself, yourself, isn't it? Like asking yourself a question: what is it I want to express? Is there another way I can express it? And making those decisions constantly, and trying so many, many, many different things before arriving at a final piece. So, well, thank you so much, Ryan, for sharing these wonderful examples with us. I think you've really brought the ideas of the elements and principles of design to life for us, and we hope that this presentation provides some inspiration as we are all thinking about how we can move from an idea to an artistic creation. So, thanks very much.
No, thank you, and I'm looking forward to see the creations that students come up with.